Hey guys, so it's Johnny from JH Movie Reviews, and first we're going to foray into a bit of horror because that's my favourite genre. The horror franchise we're looking at today is Wrong Turn. It's to celebrate the release of the newest Wrong Turn film, which is coming out on the 26th of Feb. So how this is going to work is I'm going to rank from the worst film to the best film in the franchise, and basically give you my thoughts of them on specific things like acting, script, the music, and just kind of having a little bit of fun. So the Wrong Turn franchise, I watched it when I was younger, the first one and the second one, and I haven't watched a lot of these films, like 3, 4, 5 and 6, are totally new to me, so this is my first foray into those films. Just to let you know guys as well, there will be minor spoilers, but let me know what you think after the video guys. It would really help if I had a like or subscribe on this video, and hopefully you guys will enjoy the content and I'll create more movie reviews. So let's start off with the worst of the worst. Wrong Turn 5, Bloodlines. The year it came out was 2012, and it was directed by Declan O'Brien, a name you will probably hear numerous times throughout this video. How I can describe this film is that there is a group of teenagers or young adults that go to a Mountain Man festival in a town. Now this is a festival celebrating something that happened to the town where some of the original townsfolk disappeared and were apparently cannibalized. So the movie stars our three main villains, Sawtooth, One Eye, and the famous Three Fingers. And basically they wreak havoc in this town. This film also includes horror royalty of Doug Bradley, who plays Pinhead in the Hellraiser franchise, but he does an awful job in this film at portraying one of the villains, which is one of the newest villains that they introduced into the series. This is a prequel to the first, second and the third film. So it gets a little bit confusing because it is a numbered title of number 5, and the title Bloodlines, it doesn't really make any sense. I guess you could say it makes sense because the bloodline of these mutant hillbillies is strong, and this father character played by Doug Bradley is trying to continue that sort of family. As I've mentioned, the acting is terrible. There's no emotion, there's no chemistry between characters. It starts off with a very adult scene, just keep the kid friendly. Unlikable characters, a bit of cheesiness, but it's nothing to make you like the film. Actually, it's a lot more boring than it is entertaining. Also, another funny thing to say is that the guy who plays Iron Fist in the Marvel TV show Iron Fist makes an appearance in this. This is the second time, maybe it's the third time, but it's the second time that I've seen him in a horror film. He was also in Leatherface, the newest Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, and it just seemed really weird, playing a very weird character. He was only in it for like 2 minutes, maybe, or less, and it was just, I just laughed to myself with it. Talking more about the acting, I mean, the guy who plays Three Fingers in this sounds more like Scooby-Doo. He makes these really weird laughs, and you start thinking that somebody's going to pull off his face and it's going to be a mask and it's going to be just a normal looking bloke, but it was so funny to hear his Scooby-Doo laughs. That made it slightly more entertaining than I thought it would be. And let's not even talk about the stupid character decisions throughout this movie, which I can't say wrecks the movie because the movie wrecks itself, but there's no decisions. I'll give a little spoiler warning here. A woman who wants to get out of this situation is talking to Doug Bradley's character, who's in a jail cell, right? And the three villains are trying to break Doug Bradley out of the prison cell, and Doug Bradley makes this deal with one of the characters, one of the main characters, that if she opens the cell for him, she'll be let go and everything like that. But think about how stupid that decision is. A maniac killer, a potential father to these three mutant hillbillies that's terrorizing everybody and killed most of your friends, for some reason you're gonna let him out of the jail cell, and lo and behold, he betrays her, cuts out her eyes, and it's just terrible. It's just terrible. It makes you feel nothing for the characters. You have nobody to root for. There's no good characters in it. There's no story here. There's a promise of the Mountain Man Festival, which could be a surprising kill count, but the film doesn't really foray into that sort of territory. And let's just talk about the town for a little bit. The town just looks like a studio lot. It looks terrible. It looks terrible. It looks fake. It looks empty. It looks like it hasn't been lived in, which is very, very weird because there's a festival happening not far away from where the characters end up, and it really is unbelievable. Now, usually in a horror film you have a final girl or a final guy. There was none of that here. And really you could think of this as you knew what was going to happen, because this is a prequel. This is a prequel to the first 3 movies. You know most of these mutant hillbilly characters are meant to survive. But if you think of it as sort of like a reimagining, I guess you could, but then it does reference previous films. It's so convoluted and weird how they've put this story together. And it's surprising because Declan O'Brien, who has done 3, 4 and 5, so they're including this one, just has no sense of story, no sense of continuity, and it really does my head in. Another detractor from this film really is the runtime. The runtime of the film feels very, very slow. The way I kind of gauge how bored I am of the film is if I look at my phone to see what time it is, or how long is left on the film. And I did that about 5 times throughout it. Let's talk about the effects a little bit. Now, when you make a horror movie, effects can be everything because you need those kills to look really realistic. Now, the kills in this, no. It's serviceable at best. Not as bad as some of the other entries with some of the CGI deaths. So yeah, the effects aren't just gore. The makeup effects of the 3 hillbilly characters are just worse somehow than the 2003 original film and the subsequent sequels. But they even shoot them in broad daylight, which shows the makeup, and it doesn't look natural at all. So it was very hard for me to rate this film, but if I was to rate it, and this is out of 5, I would say 0.5 out of 5. That's how bad this film is. Now let's move on to the next one in the series, which is a little bit better. The next film I'm going to talk about in the franchise is Wrong Turn 3, which are part of number 5, called Left 4 Dead. Not the good video game, just a terrible film. It was released in 2009, and it was the first film in the franchise directed by Declan O'Brien, who you will see numerous times throughout this video. So whereas a lot of these films are considered prequels or reimaginings, whichever way you want to say it, this film is a direct sequel to Wrong Turn 2 Dead End, and it picks up with Three Fingers and the child that he has at the end of Wrong Turn 2, wreaking havoc on some prisoners who are being transported from one prison to another. They find some cash in an armoured truck, and you know, it's about who's carrying the cash, and sometimes it's trying to give you a little bit of suspense, who's against who's the real villain here. Is it the mutants, which you don't see much of. The screen time of Three Fingers and the other character Three Toes just is nothing. There's no screen time, and this is actually one of my favourite versions of Three Fingers. I think he was played well for what the character is, but and to be honest, Three Toes is underutilized. There are some references to the first film, but they're very few and far between. But it shows that it is continuing a storyline, well, what they call a storyline anyway, continuing a storyline of the franchise. It does deliver on the ending of Wrong Turn 2 Dead End. We will get that, but it does it in a very lazy way, and it doesn't really show passage of time. It doesn't make sense with certain characters being older. It just doesn't make sense. So whereas a comedic factor was introduced into Wrong Turn 2 Dead End, Wrong Turn 3 went for a more serious approach, which really kind of hurt this film. I mean, Wrong Turn 2 had these very comedic moments, which worked well with the rest of the film, but this just didn't work because it was too serious. It was trying to take itself seriously. It was trying to show these twists and turns, which, yeah, okay, they make sense, but they're just nothing to gawk at. We're on to the effects now, and the effects in this is probably the worst in the franchise for me. It literally, the CGI effects look like PS1 graphics. That's how bad they are. Most notably, the cheese grater scene. A guy gets split into three, and it just looks terrible. There's a part where a guy's face is running across the floor on a moving car, and it just looks terrible. CGI blood, CGI effects. It was lazy. It looked really, really, really bad. I know the budget of this film was very low, but it just really, really irked me that it was this bad. Who looked at this film and went, that's good CGI effects? Even though Wrong Turn 5 is worse than this, I gotta say this is hardly a step above, but it's just terrible. It's one of the worst films I've ever seen. So now we have Wrong Turn 4. Which is, again, directed by Declan O'Brien, the last film that I'm going to talk about that's got him in the directing seat. And it came out in 2011, so it's just a year before the sequel. It's called Bloody Beginnings because it's the first time that they kind of went back to the past, where it kind of explained where One Eye, Three Fingers and Sawtooth came from. And I've got to admit, when this movie first started, I had a lot of hopes for it, to be honest. There was a good use of music to set the tone. It had more of the comedic factor, which Wrong Turn 3 was kind of losing, and it made it really entertaining in the start. Even though it wasn't that original, it had the three main villains, backstory kind of explained, in a satisfying way, I guess. But then after the first 10 minutes, it really shows its head of what type of film this is. But it's a few decades later where they're living in this sanitarium where they were apparently captured and imprisoned, and then these teenagers that are looking for a cabin in the winter come across shelter in this sanitarium, and basically our three main villains pick them off one by one. And it has a really satisfying ending to me. I thought it was really funny. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I think the ending was really like, it defied expectations. Even though this is a prequel and we know that these three main villains are going to survive, it just was really surprising what they did. And it was actually some good use of CGI effects throughout this movie, which didn't happen in Wrong Turn 3. I think they've really upped their game in that regard, and they actually used a lot more practical effects this time around. Even though the makeup effects of the three main villains still looks really pretty bad compared to the first and second movies, it was still serviceable. The kind of only time that they use CGI effects is when the kill is more extravagant than your usual stabby, runny, stabby. But the film does use a number of practical effects, and the set design is actually really good. The excuse for them being in this place is a little bit lackluster, but the excuse of them not being able to leave is a lot more believable, being that there's a snowstorm outside which prevents them from getting anywhere. As has grown custom in these films, the dialogue is really bad, the script is really corny. This is probably one of the better ones in terms of acting, I guess, but it really, really loses steam towards the middle of the film, and you start getting slightly bored of what they're trying to tell you. Towards the end, it really does pick up, and it becomes a better film. I'm not going to say it's a good film, I'm not going to say it's a great film. I'm just going to say it was a film which was entertaining. On the subject of characters, our main characters are introduced in a very weird version. You'll know what I mean if you were to watch the film. So if I was watching this when I was younger and my parents walked in, they would wonder what my viewing habits were, because there are some scenes in this. Let's just say, you know, you probably see it in an adult film store and nowhere else, but somehow made it into this film. I was left laughing at certain scenes. Now, whether this was intentional or not, I don't know, but it was actually very tongue-in-cheek at times. Towards the end, especially the ending, is, to me, I don't know what it was about it, is very impressive. It had a little bit of the original Wrong Turn music, which kind of brought nostalgia back. I wonder what they got coming in the next film, and then I was disappointed by Wrong Turn 5. So let's move on to our third film on the list, Wrong Turn 6, Last Resort. So Wrong Turn 6, this film was directed, thankfully, by a different director called Valery Milev. And it came out in 2014 and is the latest release from this franchise, except for the one that's coming out this year. So the story of the film is a group of friends go to a hotel. One of our characters has inherited this hotel presumably from a death. It doesn't really delve into that. This character really suffers with, it seems, depression and certain things like that, which has pushed him to the edge. And this is kind of like a getaway, which is hopefully going to change his life around. But obviously, we have our three main villains in Three Fingers, Sawtooth, and One Eye, who just wreck the party. But let's be honest here. This is a really fresh take. It is not perfect. It may not even be good, but I flippin' enjoyed this film. And that is surprising to say that I enjoyed a sixth film in a horror franchise, which 90%, I would say, of the films are pure rubbish. Unfortunately, there are some things that are bad with this film, mostly the bad CGI effects. It does try to do some practical effects, which can be good, sometimes can be bad, but the CGI kills, not as bad as a lot of the films in the franchise, just look plain terrible. Moving on to the cinematography and the editing, it had some very weird editing techniques, I've got to say. As soon as this film started, and it starts with two bikers, like mountain bikers, going through the woods and getting picked off by mostly Three Fingers, and the editing in it was so fast paced, and it just didn't make sense. It was my eyes were rolling around everywhere, and it was hard to follow. And later on in the film, there was even like stationary shots where somebody would be like really sad or, you know, annoyed, and then in the next cut it would be them smiling, and it just really took me out of the movie. The acting itself isn't terrible, but there are strange decisions from the characters. They're not bad decisions, but they're strange decisions, just made to push the movie along. Another thing that's not too bad about this film is the set design. The set design of this, it makes you feel like they're in the middle of nowhere. It makes you feel like it's a rundown hotel. But let's be serious here. I understand shabby chic, but this hotel goes too far. Who the hell would stay in a hotel where all the paint is literally peeling off the walls? Which doesn't make sense. On the fact of character decisions, there's one really strange one where one of the villains is literally cleaning up blood off a wall. One of the other characters, one of our main characters, witnesses this and doesn't say anything throughout the whole film. It was like a scene that was just thrown in there to go, yeah, this villain's killing people. It doesn't explain why. She doesn't even mention this to her friends. And there are parts where basically one of our other characters witnesses one of the three hillbillies eating a dead deer, and again doesn't mention this fact. So they seem like throwaway scenes. These are things that you talk to your friends about, and it just doesn't happen. One thing that would have really helped with this movie is not actually making it a Wrong Turn movie, and also not to have the three main villains in the movie, because it deals with a cult, it deals with a family line. I guess the whole family line and the idea of keeping the bloodlines of these hillbillies strong and everything. That was, all the cult stuff was really quite interesting and a different take on the Wrong Turn franchise, but it really just, it didn't need our three killers, our three villains, because it just doesn't make sense. It really does not make sense. Anyways, I wouldn't say this is a perfect film. I wouldn't even say this is a good film or a great film. I'd say this is, again, quite serviceable, but it has interesting things to tell. It has some interesting characters. To be fair, the two hotel-like janitors are quite interesting, and it does bring you into this story of this cult. Well, I like to call it a cult, but it's more of a family, I guess. But it has some great set design, some good gore, some bad CGI effects in certain scenes. And finally, we're at the top two films. So number 2 is Wrong Turn 2: Dead End. And this is directed by Joe Lynch, and it came out in 2007. And yes, it took 4 years to make a sequel to Wrong Turn, which I was very surprised about when I was younger. I remember at the end of Wrong Turn, I was always theorizing, like, oh, where's this gonna go to? How is this gonna happen? Kind of like the way I feel about the MCU, where I'm just like, I wonder if that leads to that, I wonder if that leads to that, but let's just be honest with this. Let's be honest, this isn't a MCU tier film at all, but it's very, very, very enjoyable. This film is really, really interesting because it is totally different to the first one while still having an essence of what the first one was. So how this film kind of works out is that there's these celebrities which are put onto a reality TV show where they're pitted against each other, almost like a battle royale, but it's all filmed, there's cameras throughout the woods, and this is being televised. And our villain Three Fingers returns in this one from the first film, and him and his cannibalistic family just wreak havoc on these celebrities. It really leans hard on this reality TV show, a found footage feeling, which was a craze back in the day, and it really, really makes this film quite fun because it has all these like introductions of the characters which you usually have in a reality TV show. Now let me give you a little bit of background on this film, considering it is one of the films that I have seen before I did this review. I remember being so hyped. Wrong Turn 1 left on a sort of cliffhanger, and I wanted to see the continuation of the story. Not that there is much story to these things, but I wanted to know what would happen, where they're gonna go in this one. And the way they went was quite interesting in my opinion. But when I watched it originally, this was when I was like, what, like 14, something like that. I really did not enjoy this film. It was terrible when I was younger. It was nothing like the first one, and I just wanted the first one done again, rather than what Wrong Turn 2 did, which was change up the formula slightly and just give us a different take on the Wrong Turn franchise. With effects, most of the effects, if not all, I can't tell you that for a fact, but I'd say most of the effects in this film are practical and they look good. I had the famous body splitting effect right at the start, which to anybody's eyes now would look a bit rubbish, but back in the day I was eating that up as a kid. I was like, oh, that looks cool. And unlike the first film, this added an essence of comedy, and this really elevated the movie with a reality TV show setting and some of the characters' decisions. And we do actually have people that we root for, which is different to a lot of these films where a lot of the characters you just want to die. Not only that, this movie really wears its inspirations on its sleeve. So we've got one of the characters wearing a Battle Royale t-shirt, which is a film where people are pitted against each other in a game where they kill each other to win. And there's a dinner scene towards the end of the film which is very, very reminiscent to Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise and their dinner scenes, and even references Rambo or Predator, those kind of movies, you know, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, where one of the characters, a Marine called Dale Murphy, who is played expertly by Henry Rollins. What this film does well with some of the story points and the characters is it throws a few curveballs at you. You think you know who's going to survive. It really subverts expectations on which character you are following, because there's a lot of them that you do like, so you want a lot of them to survive. But compared to the first film, this has a lot slower pace towards the start of the film. It doesn't really get into the mutant hillbilly stuff for the first half hour really, but this is really to introduce the characters and the kind of role that they're going to play in this film, which I thought was, when I was younger, I thought that was really boring, and now that I look back at it, it is so tongue-in-cheek, so enjoyable. There's even a scene where the guy finds, like, he thinks it's part of the reality TV show, where he finds meat, and he's like, oh, we'll take this back to the rest of the group. So they start eating it, and one of the characters who's been attacked by this mutant hillbilly comes over and goes, oh my god, you're eating human? No, I'm paraphrasing that. Really funny, and it melds that comedy and the horror really well, in my opinion. And going back to the effects, some of the makeup effects on the mutant hillbillies don't look very good, but not as bad as the subsequent sequels, because for some reason the movie's effects started off really good, and then as the movie franchise went on, got worse and worse. Finally, the camera work was good, but in certain circumstances it was too shaky, too hard to understand what was on the screen, especially in the action-oriented scenes. It really detracted from the effects and made it look cheaper than it actually was. Not just that, but the music is less impactful than the first movie, which of course, number one. And now we've come to number one, Wrong Turn. This movie came out in 2003 and was directed by Rob Schmidt. So young adults go into the woods and blah 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 blah, you get the gist. This is your standard horror movie set in the woods, in the middle of nowhere, mutant hillbillies running after you. What more could you want? When I tried watching this movie for the rating, I wanted to pull back that veil of nostalgia watching this movie, but it really just didn't work. It didn't work because I love this movie. I don't know what it is about this movie, but I can call this, to me, a horror classic. I will revisit this many, many times and enjoy it every single time. This movie came out when these types of movies were all the rage. I mean, I remember not long after this movie, Hills of Eyes, the remake, was released, and it had a similar sort of tone, obviously in different settings, but this movie kind of, to me, started that off in the new millennium of the 2000s, because this movie, to me, this movie is great. This movie starred Desmond Harrington and Eliza Dushku, which are probably actors that you'd recognise from what they look like, but don't know where they're from. They've been in loads of films. Unfortunately, these two actors played the most boring characters. The most standout character was Scott, which was played by Jeremy Sisto, who is not only the funny part of the movie, but he is also the most knowledgeable. He even references stuff like Deliverance when they go into the cabin, and he's really aware of what's happening in a way, but unfortunately his character is short-lived, pardon the pun, but he really, really shines in this movie. It's a wonder that I haven't seen him in more movies other than this. Surprisingly, the effects in this are the best in the franchise, which is really weird because it came out in 2003. The makeup on the three villains, Three Fingers, One Eye, and Sawtooth look absolutely amazing in this film. And this is the only Wrong Turn movie that has a standout scene, which is the cabin. And this really melds the music, suspense, gore. It really like shows off the makeup effects of these mutant hillbillies. On the negative side, you could be put off by the intro to this film. It's not very well filmed. It's not really a representation of what this film is. And it might throw you off and you might just turn off the movie and go, not for me. But seriously, stick it out. As soon as you get to that cabin scene, which is probably around 30 minutes into the movie, you'll really enjoy it, in my opinion. And talking about the music earlier, the music is, to me, dare I say, well composed. It builds up suspense, which it's meant to do, and really amps up the scenes, especially, again, in the cabin scene or in the watchtower scene. It really pumps up the suspense. Going back to the effects, I've mentioned the makeup, but if we're going to talk about gore effects, this really had the most amount of practical that you could have in a Wrong Turn movie. But not only that, there is a great melding of CGI and practical effects, which is surprising for the time that they melded so well together, whereas later films in the franchise really did not meld them well together. And you probably didn't know, but this has an end credit scene which pumps you up, or tries to pump you up, for the next movie. So this after credit scene came before any MCU movies. So suck on that, MCU. And that's it. That's my ranking of the 6 films in the Wrong Turn franchise. I'm looking forward to the newest Wrong Turn movie, which is apparently a reimagining. Let's hope it's not as bad as some of these sequels. I may be very surprised. And I want to thank everybody that has watched this video. Please like, subscribe, click that bell icon to get notified when I'm making new content. And please follow me on Facebook under JH Movie Reviews, where I put updates of what movie reviews I will be doing. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.